Kate Morgan knew something inside her had broken the moment she failed to recognize the woman staring back at her from the glass wall of her downtown Seattle office. To the world, she was the iron-willed chief executive who negotiated billion-dollar developments with terrifying precision. But the reflection confronting her now held the truth she had no strength left to hide. She could command empires, yet she could not speak the language of her own daughter. The realization hit like a sudden drop from a great height, violent and breath-stealing, as though her success had become a skyscraper built on hollow foundations. Outside, the city rose with its familiar rhythm of ferries cutting across the sound and high-rises shimmering under a pale sun. But none of its energy could reach the numbness settling deep in her chest. 10 years had passed since the night her husband died on a wet highway, leaving her alone with a 2-year-old girl who would later lose the ability to speak entirely. Ava, now 12, communicated through American Sign Language, with a grace and fluency that felt like a world Kate had never been invited into. She had tried to learn, of course. She studied late into the night, practicing signs in front of mirrors until her fingers ached, but her movements always felt stiff and hesitant. In business, hesitation was a weapon turned against you. At home, hesitation was a wound that reopened every time Ava's eyes dimmed with the quiet disappointment of not being understood. Kate felt that disappointment like a bruise she kept pressing, hoping it would stop hurting, but knowing it never would. In the corporate sphere, she was feared, respected, mythologized. People lowered their voices when she entered a room, mistaking her constant restraint for unshakable strength. Yet the same executives who flinched at her gaze had no idea how often she closed her office door just to breathe without shattering. The irony was almost cruel. The woman believed to be untouchable was being undone each day by the silence of a girl who weighed less than 90 pounds. The city outside rumbled with ambition, but for Kate, every sound only emphasized the one thing she lacked, the one connection she desperately needed but could not create. And the clock kept moving each minute, another reminder that her daughter was growing up without a mother, fluent in her world. That morning, she was supposed to review a proposal worth $4.3 million, yet her mind lingered on the small scene she had witnessed before leaving home. Ava sat at the kitchen table drawing the early light as it filtered through the window, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who poured entire galaxies into quiet spaces. When she saw her mother, Ava signed good morning with soft lifting brows. Kate responded a heartbeat too late. That single hesitation, barely a flicker, was enough to dim the girl's expression. It was there and gone in an instant, but it gnawed at Kate as relentlessly as truth always does. A mother should not need translations to understand her child, she thought, and the shame of that truth settled in her bones like winter cold. A knock on the door broke her spiraling thoughts. Her assistant listed a chain of meetings stretching through the day, each with stakes high enough to intimidate most executives. Kate listened with only half her attention because buried in that list was the reminder she dreaded hearing she had promised Ava breakfast that morning. Promised, but forgotten until now. The sting of guilt cut sharper than any boardroom confrontation. She could stare down competitive rivals without blinking. But the idea of disappointing her daughter again made her throat tighten. In that moment, the woman everyone believed unbreakable felt frighteningly close to collapse. Not because of corporate pressures, but because she feared she was losing the one person whose voice she had never truly heard. Kate arrived at the cafe on Capitol Hill with the uneasy feeling that the morning was testing her in ways she had not prepared for. The place hummed with weekend warmth, parents chatting over steaming mugs, children darting between tables like sparks of color against the autumn light. Yet amidst the cheerful noise, Ava seemed impossibly small, sitting alone at a corner table sketchbook, open gaze drifting to a world only she could fully enter. Kate watched her daughter's delicate fingers trace swirling patterns, and a pang of helplessness tightened beneath her stern exterior. Here, stripped of titles and influence, she felt exposed, as if every flaw she hid behind her power suit had followed her into this crowded room. While ordering their breakfast, Kate glanced back toward Ava just in time to see a young boy with sandy hair approach her table with the unfiltered confidence only children possess. His father followed a moment later, tall, easy-shouldered, wearing a simple flannel shirt that marked him as someone unbothered by corporate hierarchies. Kate braced for an interruption she might need to manage a moment where she would have to translate discomfort for Ava. But something extraordinary unfolded instead. The man lifted his hands and began to sign with smooth, fluid motions that carried the ease of a native speaker. Ava's head snapped up, her eyes widening, not in fear, but in recognition, in delight, in relief. Within seconds, she was signing back with brilliance Kate had almost forgotten her daughter possessed. It stunned her, froze her in place. Ava's hands moved with speed and clarity, her face alive with meaning, her entire body shedding the quiet tension she carried at home. Kate realized then that she had never actually seen her daughter fully expressive, fully confident. She had only glimpsed fragments of what Ava might have been if she had a conversational partner who spoke her language without hesitation. Watching them was like discovering a secret door in her own house, one she had lived beside for years but never managed to unlock. It hurt sharply because inside that door was the version of Ava she feared she had failed to nurture. The man introduced himself as Ethan Bennett when Kate finally returned to the table, trying to mask her shock under the practiced calm of corporate diplomacy. His voice carried a quiet warmth, but his hands, even while resting, moved with subtle linguistic precision. Kate asked how he knew American Sign Language, expecting the usual story of a family member or a college elective. But instead, he revealed a truth that shifted her perception entirely. His mother had been an educator at the Washington School for the Deaf for 3 decades. He had grown up signing before he could speak. It was not merely proficiency he held, but a lineage of fluency woven into childhood and identity. He had mastered a world Kate had spent years trying to enter and failing. Ava and the little boy Leo were now drawing together in a shared flurry of crayons and animated signs. Their laughter, silent yet vibrant, created a space so natural it felt unfair that Kate stood outside it. She attempted a few signs slower than she intended, careful but clumsy beside Ethan's graceful motions. He did not correct her. Instead, he offered gentle encouragement, the kind that acknowledged effort without condescension. Yet each gesture reminded her of the distance she still had to cross. For a woman accustomed to being the most capable person in any room, the unfamiliar humility bruised her pride in ways she struggled to hide. Then her phone began to vibrate relentlessly, pulling her back into the world that demanded her perfection. Headlines were spreading she had been spotted out during work hours. Investors were panicking, and a board member had called for an emergency meeting. Kate felt the familiar armor rising, urging her to retreat to protect what she had built. But she looked at Ava, cheeks glowing, hands animated, and felt something shift inside her. For once, the world she controlled could wait. Something far more precious was unfolding, something she had nearly lost without realizing it. And as Ethan handed her a simple business card with a class schedule typed in modest ink, she sensed that this stranger, overlooked by the world, possessed a power she desperately needed, the ability to unlock her daughter's voice. The week that followed unfolded like a battlefield Kate had crossed too many times. Yet this time, every blow landed deeper than she expected. By Monday morning, the tech blogs had plastered her name across their feeds, pointing out that the feared Kate Morgan had been seen at a cafe during business hours, instead of preparing for a crucial investor briefing. Commentators speculated about distraction instability, a loss of focus, and her board members absorbed every rumor, like fuel thrown onto an already smoldering fire. The whispers that once died in her presence now echoed through conference rooms, with reckless boldness, as if her moment of humanity had cracked the myth of invincibility that shielded her. What stung most was how familiar this cycle felt, as though the world had been waiting for the smallest slip, to remind her that a woman in power was still expected to be flawless or be replaced. Meetings blurred into one another as she fought to maintain control of fissures widening beneath her company's foundation. Marcus, a board member hungry for her position, had already begun planting doubts about her leadership, painting her as a distracted mother whose personal life weakened corporate strategy. Even as she countered each accusation, she felt her attention split between two worlds, the corporate sphere demanding her sharpest intellect, and the memory of Ava's joyful signing, pulling her heart somewhere entirely different. It became painfully clear that she had been living a double life, excelling in the world that rewarded ruthlessness, while failing in the one that required vulnerability. That conflict bled into every conversation she had, as if her body were in the boardroom. But her mind remained in that cafe where her daughter had finally come alive. On Thursday, after surviving another strategic ambush disguised as a performance review, she returned to her office and found her assistant Gwen waiting with a tablet displaying another round of articles criticizing her priorities. Gwen had worked beside her for 5 years, understanding her better than most, and the quiet sympathy in her eyes nearly broke something inside Kate. Instead of addressing the digital storm, Gwen asked a question that disarmed her entirely. When was the last time you did something for Ava without guilt chasing you? The words pierced more deeply than any headline. Kate had no answer. The realization sat heavy in her chest, the truth too sharp to ignore. She had let the world she built consume the child she loved. That evening, she went home before dusk, for the first time in months, stepping into a house that had grown too large for only 2 people. Light spilled through tall windows, illuminating Ava seated at the kitchen table with her homework spread neatly, her posture small, and guarded the moment she sensed her mother approaching. The silence between them felt fragile, as if one wrong gesture could shatter what little remained of their connection. Kate sat beside her and signed slowly, asking if she would like to attend an American Sign Language family class on Saturday. For a breathless second, Ava's face remained unreadable. Then the girl's expression burst open with unfiltered hope, a rare brightness so pure it made Kate's throat tighten. She signed question after question. Would Leo be there? Could they go every week? Would it really be allowed? The eagerness, the disbelief, the joy rising like light behind her eyes showed Kate how starved her daughter had been for belonging. Saturday morning arrived under a blanket of gray mist rolling in from Elliott Bay, the kind of fog that makes the world feel suspended between fear and possibility. Kate drove to the community center feeling out of place in her designer jeans, surrounded by families of all backgrounds who greeted one another with quick, confident signs. And then she saw him. Ethan stood at the front of the room, setting up visual aids, with the ease of someone who understood not only the language, but the culture, the rhythm, the heart at its core. He looked up and smiled when he recognized Ava, and the girl practically glowed under the warmth of being truly seen. Kate watched that small transformation, something blooming in her daughter that she had never known how to nurture. In that instant, she sensed something shifting, not just in Ava, but in herself, as if she were standing on the threshold of a new world she had been too afraid to enter. A world where power was measured not by dominance, but by connection. A world where she was no longer the weakest participant, but perhaps someone capable of learning, changing, and finally becoming the mother her daughter needed. The class unfolded with a quiet magic Kate had never witnessed, as if the moment she stepped through the door, she had entered a world where communication no longer relied on sound, but intention, expression, and trust. Families gathered in a loose semicircle, each at a different stage of learning, yet all bound by a shared desire to understand the children they loved. Ava moved through the room with an ease that startled her mother, her hands slicing through the air, with the elegance of someone who finally felt at home. The girl's confidence grew with each passing minute, blooming like a long shuttered window thrown open to sunlight. And Kate felt both awe and regret coil tightly inside her. She had never seen her daughter so sure of herself, so unafraid to be visible. Ethan instructed the class with natural command, his gestures sharp yet graceful, his expressions shifting with the fluidity of a storyteller. He explained not only vocabulary, but the cultural weight behind ASL, demonstrating how space, eyebrows, and movement shaped meaning. Every detail he shared revealed a depth far beyond what Kate had expected from someone who dressed so simply and spoke so gently. She realized then that she had underestimated him, mistaking his quiet demeanor for modest skill, when in truth he carried the authority of someone who had lived this language since childhood. His presence drew the children in, but what struck Kate most was how he drew Ava out. With him, her daughter was not translating herself into something smaller, but expanding into the person she had always been. During the mid-class break, the children gathered around a long table covered in paper and markers, but it was Ava who took initiative. She tapped the table twice to gather everyone's attention, mimicking the method she had watched Ethan use. To Kate's astonishment, the room paused for her. Then Ava began signing, rapidly proposing a game she called a silent story circle, something she had clearly invented on the spot. Each child would sign one sentence of a story building on what came before, using classifiers to show movement and emotion. Even the shyest children leaned forward, captivated. As the game progressed, Ava guided them with subtle corrections, her confidence radiating like a beacon. It was the first time Kate saw her daughter not simply participating, but leading. One boy, barely 5, struggled to understand classifiers. Instead of stepping back or looking to an adult, Ava knelt beside him, her movements patient but firm, as she demonstrated how 2 fingers walking could represent a person, how the angle of a hand could shape the size of a dog or the height of a tree. When he finally formed the sign correctly, his entire face lit up, and Ava smiled with a pride so natural it sent a sharp ache through Kate. It was as though her daughter had been waiting her whole life to be in a room where she was not the quiet one or the exception, but the teacher, the guide, the person others admired. Watching that unfold was like witnessing a future rewritten in real time. While the children played, Ethan appeared beside Kate with 2 cups of coffee, his expression softened by quiet admiration for the girl at the center of the room. He told Kate that Ava possessed rare linguistic intuition, a natural fluency in ASL grammar he had seen only in native signers. His voice carried no flattery, only truth and the honesty of it, unsettled Kate in ways she could not name. She realized she had spent years treating Ava's silence as a limitation when it had always been a doorway, one she herself had never known how to open. Ethan, without effort, had unlocked what she could not. The admission stung, yet alongside the pain rose a surprising sense of hope that perhaps she was not too late to learn. As class ended, families packed up slowly, reluctant to break the warmth that had filled the room. Ava clung to the lingering energy of connection, her eyes bright, her shoulders loose, her entire body humming with belonging. Kate watched her daughter's joy with a mix of pride and fear, knowing this single morning had changed something fundamental. she sensed a shift within herself as well. Subtle but undeniable, a quiet unraveling of the armor she had built to survive the last decade. For the first time in years, she felt not powerless, but inexperienced, standing at the edge of a world she was desperate to understand. And as Ava reached for her hand with a confidence she had not shown in years, Kate understood that what she feared was not failure anymore, but the possibility that this new world might finally reveal who she truly was beneath the invincible facade she had worn far too long. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm Kate had never imagined. She could sustain a rhythm that felt strangely human after years of orchestrating her life with mechanical precision. Saturday mornings became untouchable, carved out like sacred territory between her old world and the new one, slowly forming around her. She and Ava rode together toward the Fremont Community Center with a quiet excitement that softened the air inside the car. It startled Kate how easily this routine soothed her, as though a part of her long dormant had begun to breathe again. She noticed the small things, the way Ava leaned forward when they neared the building and the flutter of her hands. When she spotted Leo, the expressive brightness returning to her eyes. After each class, the four of them often wandered to a small family-run taqueria near the waterfront, a place that smelled of lime and grilled corn and felt warmer than any boardroom Kate had ever conquered. Ava and Leo took the booth by the window, communicating effortlessly in their shared language, their gestures animated with the energy of children rediscovering companionship. Across from them, Ethan sat with the quiet steadiness of someone who did not need to speak to be heard. Kate found herself studying him despite herself, the gentle humor when he interacted with the children, the careful attention he offered without imposing the history behind his eyes that revealed a man shaped not by ambition, but by loss and resilience. She had known powerful men all her life. None of them carried power the way he did, quietly, almost reluctantly, as if the world's weight had taught him strength rather than demanded it. In those moments, Kate felt her protective walls shifting, cracking in delicate, unfamiliar ways. She tried to ignore it at first, reminding herself of the chaos awaiting her at the office, the headlines still whispering about unstable leadership, the board monitoring her every move. Yet the more time she spent with Ethan and the children, the more she sensed a truth she had deliberately avoided. She was exhausted by the world she had built, a world where connection was a luxury she had never allowed herself. One afternoon, as Ava and Leo argued playfully over who could draw a better squirrel, Kate caught Ethan watching her daughter with such gentleness that her throat tightened. It struck her that he understood Ava's silence, not as a limitation, but as another form of expression. And for the first time, Kate realized how lonely Ava must have been before finding someone who listened the way she needed. Still, Kate resisted the shift inside herself, clinging to her carefully constructed composure. She was not someone who leaned on others. She had raised a child alone, run a corporation, alone survived grief alone. Yet solitude, once a shield, now felt like a room she had outgrown. She tried to pretend it did not matter, but every week her resolve thinned. One Saturday after class ended, the children begged for extra time at the park. Kate agreed reluctantly, her schedule always ticking in the back of her mind. But as she watched Ava teach Leo a series of dramatic classifiers to mimic superheroes leaping across rooftops, she felt a sudden, aching clarity. Ava was not just happy, she was flourishing. And the reason for that stood beside her hands, tucked into his flannel pockets, smiling softly, as though he had no idea of the impact he carried. The shift between her and Ethan happened not with a grand gesture, but with a small, unexpected moment. She had been signing something to Ava, stumbling over a complicated phrase, when Ethan stepped in, quietly adjusting the angle of her hands, guiding her expression with the lightest touch at her elbow. His closeness unsettled her, not because it felt intrusive, but because it felt strangely natural, as though her body recognized a safety her mind had not yet admitted. She pulled back quickly, but the warmth lingered, traveling through her like a memory she had not lived yet. Driving home later, Ava fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head tipped toward the window, her fingers still curled, as though holding the last signs she had made. Kate watched her for a long moment before pulling onto the road, overwhelmed by a truth she could no longer deny. For years she believed power meant independence, isolation, command. Now she saw another form of power entirely: the courage to let someone in. And even though she was not ready to name what she felt forming between her and Ethan, she understood this much with startling certainty. Whatever was happening was changing her, reshaping her life, as surely as it had reshaped Ava's. And for the first time in a decade, she felt something dangerously close to hope. The boardroom felt colder than usual, as if the air itself had braced for confrontation. Kate entered with the composed precision of someone who had rebuilt herself from ruin more than once, though every man at the table seemed convinced she was finally cracking. They watched her with thinly veiled anticipation, waiting for a falter, a tremor, any sign that the recent rumors of her distraction were true. Marcus sat near the center, fingers steepled, wearing a victory he had not yet earned. He had mistaken her silence for weakness, her restraint for unraveling. He launched into his accusations with the flourish of a man performing for an audience, projecting graphs and headlines that painted her as a leader losing control. His words dripped with a patronizing calm, the kind tone men used when they believed they were delivering an inevitable truth. He referenced the Café photos, the investor concerns he himself had stirred the supposed decline in her focus. Around him, the others nodded, as if swept by his confidence, their expressions heavy with judgment, disguised as concern. They had forgotten too easily who she was when cornered. When Marcus finished, the room fell into a quiet so sharp it seemed to vibrate. Kate rose slowly, her movements deliberate, almost unhurried, the way a seasoned fighter rises after letting an opponent exhaust himself. Without a word, she lifted her hands and began signing as she spoke, her gestures clear and commanding. The effect was electric. Executives who moments before had smirked now froze, startled by the sudden shift from corporate decorum to visual language. With each sign, she drew a new map of the industry, exposing an entire demographic they had been blind to for decades. She presented architectural sketches featuring visual alert systems, open sight lines, and communal spaces designed for sign language interaction. She revealed data projecting long-term value far beyond current investments, evidence of partnerships forming with accessibility groups, and endorsements from communities eager for representation. Her voice wove through her signing with a confidence that unsettled them. She was not defending herself. She was unveiling a future none of them had imagined. Then the screen lit up behind her, revealing Mr. Yamamoto joining remotely from Tokyo. His unexpected presence shifted the room's balance immediately. He praised her vision, condemned the narrowness of the board's concerns, and announced a 20% funding increase tied directly to her inclusive development initiative. The silence that followed was heavy, almost stunned, as if the room itself had swallowed its earlier arrogance. Marcus paled, stripped of confidence in an instant. When the meeting adjourned, Kate did not celebrate. She simply gathered her materials, her expression composed, her breathing steady. Victory had never been the goal. Clarity had. As she stepped into the hallway, she thought not of the men she had just outmaneuvered, but of Ava, whose hands had guided her toward this revelation. For the first time in years, she felt aligned with her work, her daughter, and herself. Not invincible, but purposeful. And that was far more powerful. In the weeks after the boardroom battle, Kate found herself moving through life with a steadiness she had not felt in years, as if something within her had quietly realigned. Saturday mornings with Ava became the center of her new rhythm, a ritual that grounded her more deeply than any corporate victory ever had. Each class revealed another layer of her daughter she had never truly seen. A confidence blossoming not from achievement, but from belonging. Watching Ava shine freely among her peers felt like witnessing a second childhood, unfolding one where the world finally spoke back to her. Her relationship with Ethan deepened in small, unspoken increments, the kind that gathers strength before either person realizes what has shifted. They lingered after class a little longer each week, sharing stories about loss, hope, and the strange resilience grief carves into a person. Kate noticed the gentleness behind his humor, the patient way he listened, and the steadiness that came not from certainty, but from having endured his own storms. She was surprised by how easily she allowed herself to lean, even in brief moments, toward the possibility of something more than friendship. One mild afternoon, the children insisted on stopping by Green Lake with sketchbooks and snacks. While Ava and Leo sprawled across a blanket drawing fantastical creatures, Kate sat beside Ethan, the late sunlight warming the air between them. When she caught him watching the children, his expression soft with something unsaid, she felt a quiet tug inside her chest. He spoke of his late wife, not with anguish, but with reverence, describing how loss had taught him to recognize joy in fleeting moments. Kate felt her defenses shift, something tender opening where she once held only caution. As the children ran ahead toward the water, laughing in silent bursts of movement, Kate stood beside Ethan and realized she was no longer afraid of the change she felt approaching. It was not a replacement for the life she lost, nor an escape from the one she had built. It was simply a path she had not expected to find. And for the first time in a decade, she did not retreat from that possibility. She stepped toward it. 5 years slipped past, with a quiet determination reshaping their lives in ways none of them could have predicted on that foggy Saturday morning when everything began to change. The house that once echoed with Kate's solitude now pulsed with warmth, filled with the everyday noise of shared routines and the steady comfort of belonging. Ava grew into a young woman whose voice lived entirely in her hands, and her expression commanding attention not through volume, but through clarity and conviction. Leo matured beside her like a brother, his artistic instinct deepening as he learned to translate silence into imagery. Their bond had become the moral center of the family, something both fragile and fiercely resilient. Kate and Ethan built their life together not through grand gestures, but through years of choosing each other in small, consistent ways. She transformed her company into a model of inclusive design, earning recognition not for profit margins alone, but for redefining how communities could communicate across differences. He expanded his teaching into a full program training families and professionals in the language he once believed would remain the private inheritance of his childhood. Their work often intersected, creating a shared mission that strengthened them even when circumstances tested their resolve. They did not try to erase the grief that had shaped them. They simply refused to let it define the future. On the day of Ava's high school graduation, the auditorium brimmed with anticipation as she stepped onto the stage, her gown shimmering beneath the lights. She delivered her valedictorian speech entirely in American Sign Language, her movements precise, expressive, luminous. An interpreter voiced her words for the audience, but the true power lived in the language of her hands. She spoke of learning to communicate beyond sound, of families formed not by accident, but by commitment, of how love sometimes arrives, not as rescue, but as recognition. When she paused and signed that the person who taught her to find her voice never used one, Kate's breath caught in her throat. Ethan took her hand as the audience rose in applause. The moment felt suspended, held in place by the weight of everything they had fought through to reach it. Later that evening, as the four of them walked beneath a sky scattered with early summer stars, Ava signed a final message that stilled them all. "Thank you for learning my language," she said. "Thank you for choosing each other and choosing me." Kate felt emotion swell steady and profound, knowing she was witnessing not an ending, but a beginning, shaped by the quiet courage of a girl who had never needed sound to speak truth. In the end, this story reminds us of a truth experts in communication and family psychology repeat. Often connection is not built on perfection, but on presence, patience, and the willingness to learn the language of those we love. What transformed this family was not a sudden miracle, but the quiet, consistent choice to see one another fully. If narratives like this move you, consider liking and subscribing so more people can discover stories that illuminate the power of empathy and inclusive communication. And before you go, share your voice in the comments with a simple phrase that captures today's message. Just right, learn to listen.